In 2020, I was a high school principal. I was tasked with leading a school through a pandemic without a blueprint. It's not a time that I want to go back to, but there was one thing that I want to elevate and take from that era. We designed everything intentionally to take care of our students. But what struck me was who was going to take care of the adults. I'm going to go back for a little bit. About 4 months ago, I was speaking in a crowded room, late March. Gave one of the most personal speeches of my life. I laughed, I cried, and so did the audience. It was my mother's eulogy. Before I walked off stage in this crowded room, I said, please stand up and connect with the people around you and share how you knew my mother. She connected so many people. And as I walked off the stage, through a lot of noise and connection and hugs, I get to the first row, about to sit with my family, and a man that I haven't seen in years, a friend of my oldest brother, approaches me and said, I've been in public speaking my whole life. That was one of the most powerful speeches I've ever heard. Now, I was super flattered, and it was a tad awkward given the context. And he said, I want to tell you about this event in Kentucky in a beautiful venue on July 4th. I dedicate these next 10 minutes or so together to my mother, the late Mickey Weinstein. She's the reason I'm here, and she's the reason I'm here. But the thing that I want to take from that is something I've been fascinated with my entire life. How do you create cultures where people thrive? Now, I was fortunate enough to be a principal at the elementary level, the middle school level, my longest tenure at the high school level, and I teach a class at Villanova University. So I've seen every age group from 5 to 50 years old, and I've worked with all of them. When people enter school, we take care of their everything. We think about what they need to learn, but we spend just as much time about the environment. So when they get off the bus and have no idea where they are and enter this school, somebody magical there picks them up at the door, brings them to a classroom, and tells them where to put their things, where to sit, how to come over to that magical carpet and sit down crisscross applesauce, go to the cafeteria, take out their food. Now, they take care of all their developmentally appropriate needs. And at 5, that sometimes means getting bitten or sneezed on or even worse. And when they leave there, they grow throughout the years, and we think less about what people need to, we think less about the culture that people are in and more what they need to do. In 2013, Rita Pierson gave a speech, one of the most famous TED Talks in education. She said, famously, every child deserves a champion. I want to extend Rita's idea. She passed away shortly after that TED Talk in 2013, and say that every person deserves a champion. And what I mean by this is, well, let me take you back to middle school, for example, which is a line that probably triggers a lot of you in the audience. My English teacher in 8th grade was a woman named Mrs. Fry. And Mrs. Fry is what we call in education a warm demander, high expectations and high support. I was scared to death of her and simultaneously never wanted to let her down. The intersection of where learning happens. And in 8th grade, we were talking about 9th grade transition. And in Philadelphia, where I grew up, there are lots of high school options. I was just going to go to my neighborhood school. Mrs. Fry calls me to her desk. I walk over there, and she shows me information. And I look down and see Central and Masterman. Now, if you're from Philly, you know they're the 2 finest public high schools in the city. And it struck me, why is she showing me this? And I realized she saw something in me that I did not see in myself. I was just an athlete going to school, and she saw somebody with so much greater potential. You know what I ended up doing? I ended up going to my neighborhood school, but that wasn't the point. The point was she saw something in me greater than that. Here we are 40 years later, and she's still in my life. Mrs. Fry was at my mother's funeral, and she was my champion. And when that impact she had on me, I know I wanted to make on other people. So I went into education. Fast forward through high school and college, my first teaching job, a man named Joe Rogers hires me. Joe's one of the kindest men I've ever known. And when you graduate college and go into the classroom, you really don't know what you're doing yet. And I remember that time and the support that he gave me, and the encouragement that he gave me. And at 29, he made me the youngest administrator in the district to work alongside him. And what I learned from Joe is this: the principal has many roles. And he would say the principal is an instructional leader, principal is a manager, but it pales in comparison to the principal as a person. You see, your example is what's going to be the most important thing you do in your culture, who you are. And that has stuck with me, so much so that on my desk, I have a little picture of Joe with the initials WWJRD. And when times get tough, and in education they do, I look at that picture, which stands for what would Joe Rogers do? And when I want to respond sometimes with my immediate instinct, I think back to the example he was and the person that I wanted to be. I was fortunate enough to work at Villanova University and teach a class called A Culture for Learning. I absolutely love it. They're graduate students in a principal certification program. They are learning how to be a principal. And we talk about how important cultures are, not just for the kids, but for the adults. 2020 is such a hard year, the hardest year of people's lives that were in education on the most part. How do we design it where people want to stay and actually enjoy going to work? This profession is so hard. So we work on that with intentionality. It's actually the premise of our course. If you're not intentional about culture, one will form without you, and it may not be the one that you want. So we plan really purposefully. We start with gratitude every class because they're coming from the classroom and sometimes they have a hard day. We'll say, how are you feeling from a 0 to 10? And somebody comes in with a 3. And then we start sharing what we're grateful for. That's a strategy. So we use that. We build all semester long. We do a community circle every day, every class. So we talk about culture actually before we get into content. And what do you think happens? Well, by the end of the semester, we grow really close because we're modeling the things that we want to set up for our classroom or school. And all of a sudden, at the end, when somebody's a 3 and they come out, they're lingering because they want to be around the people and the culture we created. If you're not intentional about the culture you wish to create, one will form without you and it may not be the one you want. I was working with a group of administrators, and I asked them, what makes a good teammate? And the reason we asked that question is because if you have a lot of good teammates, you are likely to have a good team. Transfer that to anything, a good school, a good company, a good organization, whatever you call the group of the people you work with. If they're good teammates, that's the start of a thriving culture. And they said 2 things. 1, they want somebody that unifies their team. And 2, they want somebody that embodies the team standards. Sounds really good and noble. It begs the obvious question. What are your standards? When I asked that question, I looked out at a bunch of blank faces. I knew that if I called on somebody, they wouldn't be able to answer that question. See, we want people to act in a way that we don't explicitly name. We don't take that extra step. The last school that I was in, we had 3 banners that hung on the wall. They were in the lobby, so everybody walked past them every morning. There were 3 words that had 3 values on them. 3 words. I had a faculty meeting, and there's 125 teachers in front of me. And I said, raise your hand if you know the 3 words that are on the banners that you walk past every day. And how many hands do you think went up? 1. One teacher knew. She actually got it right. It was integrity, respect, and service. Now, if you lead any organization or school with those 3 words, you're doing pretty good. But if you don't know what they are, they're likely not guiding your behavior. We decided we were going to be intentional about our culture. So we went through a series of feedback, focus groups, and a lot of meetings to refine, to come up with what we wanted our culture to be about. And we came up with 3 words: character, who we are; growth, who we want to be; and community, how we will do that together. Now, if we just left those 3 words, we already know that if they end up on a flag, they won't guide our behavior. So what we needed to do was unpack them. What does it mean to be in community with somebody? What does that look like? And what are the behaviors that follow? And that is the blueprint for how we will hold each other accountable. Not one person holding 125 accountable, but 126 holding each other accountable, and the leader too. See, we wanted to be intentional about our culture. We didn't want to be one to form that we didn't want. So I asked people, what culture do you want? Now, the New York Knicks this past year, they, in the beginning of the year, had a meeting, and everyone in the organization was there, from the owner to the coaching staff to the last player on the team. And Coach Mike Brown puts in front of them a series of commitments, talks about it with everyone, and says, don't sign this contract unless you are going to commit to the things on here. I don't want you to sign if you're not going to do that. Everybody signed it. And the rest is history. They won an NBA championship, which pains me to say as a Philadelphian. But they did have 3 Villanova players on the roster. So when I think about what culture I want to create, I think about the 3 people that inspired me as I moved forward in life. Mrs. Fry, my warm demander. Joe Rogers, the person that believed in me as an adult. And just like those 5-year-olds, we design culture for people. He did that for me when I was 22. That never ages out. Designing culture, as opposed to what you want people to do, never ages out. And finally, my mother, Mickey Weinstein, who taught me what love and connection is. Thank you.